Hello and welcome to BRIMS documentation. This time we're going to be talking about the specimen landing page panel, as well as I think I'm going to just cover that and the specimen model and kind of concepts therein, and I'm going to handle this view in the next video, which I think is the patient info panel, even though specimen information, aliquot information is displayed there as well. So really fast, let's go ahead and take a look at, so that's the front end. Let's go ahead and take a look at the back end. So looking at the model itself and actually getting into the model itself, you have a specimen type, which is like urine or blood or hair, something along those lines, just to be defined as a label. So that's, you can see the foreign key. Adding to that later, we might move types of volume or some other interesting things as far as options within the specimen type. For the moment, it's just a label, but that can be modified if you want to have it do special things in the future. Patient, of course, or a concept of a patient. So you might have a cadaver or an animal. You could change the labeling on that if you'd like, but basically specimen's always coming from something. That's what this is referencing. It's got a collect time, collect date, create date, or if it was modified because of some entry error, a modified date. Really good things to have inside any database model. Volume, and that is a float field to define how much of the thing you've got, and then any notes associated. Aliquot comes from specimen. So let's say you drew an initial blood sample of 20 milliliters. You might make 21 milliliter aliquots from that, and then send that off for testing, or make that run the test, or do whatever you need to do to procedurally create the thing that's actually being run on after the fact. So that's the relationship. So aliquot is always a child of a specimen. You're going to have sometimes different types of aliquot, depending. So with a blood sample, for example, you can do different things with that. You can extract the white blood cell count, or you could extract, I don't know, the hemoglobin count, something like that. So I gave the option for different types. Not every study is going to need to use this, so you might drop that as something that's in your back end if you want to, or you can just leave it being a bit redundant with the specimen every single time. So specimen is going to be there as a parent, as a foreign key. The type of aliquot that's coming out of that specimen is listed there. The visit is a foreign key as well, and so that's saying, okay, at what visit was this pulled from? And I put that in the aliquot instead of the specimen, primarily because as far as the visual concern, so let's go ahead and pull this up. As far as the visual concern, you're going to want to know what visit this is, the data coming out is supposed to be associated with. And as far as you're not storing a whole specimen, you're going to be usually storing the aliquot. And if you're going back to reference, okay, where's the aliquot from week 3? That's why you're going to want that association there. Just FYI. And I believe that's logical. Some people might correct me later, and at which point I'll correct the code. The schema, if you looked at the GradStack tutorial, it's pretty straightforward. Essentially, we're just dumping out, so hold on. We imported that. Let's look at resolve all specimen. It's just dumping out the object type. The one caveat in here is because I think standard practice is that you name types of things coming in, although I didn't do that for box. But so you have like a shipment type, which is this coming in, or a storage type coming in. And what that led to was some ugly naming, unfortunately, of specimen type, model type, and same thing with the aliquot, because we have types of specimen, but we also have the type in reference to the internal thing. So just be aware of that. A little bit annoying. Let's take a look at the front end code. So there's a page, a landing page table header, which is literally just a hard-coded, looking at this stage here, which is literally just a hard-coded this right here. And I left it hard-coded, one, because there's invisible stuff that shows up if you try to do object destructuring. And also this table isn't changing all that often. If it starts changing drastically, rapidly in the future, I'll move it away from hard-coding. But at the moment, I feel like leaving it hard-coding makes it easier to edit for individuals, and also it's easy to reference what is going where in this section here, which is also, rather than mapping things out, I just have it dumping directly into the cells. So you can see item.id is going to reference this stuff here. And PID, although this is going to be a link to someplace else, there's all the links, and then type. You guys get the idea. Anyway, down below, I always use render, which, if I haven't mentioned it, a lot of the CSS is handled by Semantic UI React. I highly recommend checking out this library. It's just fantastic. It lets me cheat on the CSS portion, which is where I feel like I'm weakest as a developer. Just CSS feels like its own field in and of itself, and there's just so much that happens there. This lets me build things rapidly, so I don't have to worry about all the CSS portions of the code. But it's got all sorts of cool stuff to work with. But that's where a lot of these, if you see any import from like this object here, dimmer, which isn't defined someplace else but is from Semantic UI React, that's what that is. And that's what that little twirly, let's see if I do a refresh, if it'll do it. See that twirly that came up? That's what the dimmer is. So whenever data is loading, I list out the dimmer. Error just returns error. I haven't really run into a use case where I feel like I need something more descriptive out of that yet. Once I do, I will edit that. And then you have your segment, which is again this from Semantic UI React, and the nice little red portions. That's what's happening in this portion of the code. And then I'm just mapping over everything that's coming from the back end to build table, and that's what's building the table out, which I feel like is fairly clean, straightforward code. Down below, we're wrapping the component as a higher order component and saying data.error is error, data.loading is loading, just to make things simpler, easier to do with. Data.allSpecimen is specimen. So just for clarifying in props and naming a little bit simpler on the front end UI. And then it exports this, and what we pop out with is this, which I think looks pretty nifty for being able to view all the specimen. Some things that are missing from this are pagination. As far as things that are missing, I'm going to try to recover that in the last video, but if you're looking for something to do right now, there is pagination working in this application in the patient portion. I just need to import that code and do a little bit of adjustment to the back end to make pagination work there, but pagination exists in this application. It just needs to be added here. It shouldn't take much more than some copying and pasting of code, then it'll be off and running. So next we are going to be covering what all of the action that's happening on this specimen info panel, which is a lot. So we'll be taking a look at that next.